It's a Tuesday edition of Husker247 Daily. I'm Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson over there. Apologies for the delayed release today, but we'll get into it. Matt Rhule talked yesterday. The only media availability, the only time we'll hear from him this week on the bye as Nebraska kind of hits the road recruiting. We were kind of talking before we got started, Brian, that there was a noticeable kind of tone change with Matt Rhule about transfer portal and kind of Nebraska's place and in the pecking order of things. And, I think prior to yesterday, the conversation largely has been, that more was needed, that Nebraska needed to kind of invest more in being able to secure top players. And, yesterday he said, we've got everything we need. I guess we'll start there. Were you struck by the change in tone? I mean, even a month ago, he was challenging whomever was listening to invest in the program.
Yeah, it did seem like a shift. And he talked about the ability to add and also retain, where like last year, he basically had to make some hard decisions on some guys because you maybe didn't have the money to keep everybody. So you might have had a player who was doing pretty well for himself on the team who came to you and he's like, hey, I'm getting this offer from so-and-so. And you just don't have it within you to maybe match, or you have to, maybe go elsewhere to fill his need. And so that's a big deal that there's a shift there if that's how he feels about it, because if you look at this roster, 91 of the guys are sophomores or younger of the 125 players, and only 19 are seniors. So most of this team is capable of coming back. And if you feel like you've got the money not only to beef up your room, but for instance, like look at the defensive line and you've got like Williams-Nwaneri sort of coming on. And you've got obviously like on the offensive side, like a Isaiah Hunter who's made plays. You feel like you have the goods to keep those kind of guys around. Obviously, that's going to be critical in an era where some programs just are not going to be able to do that. He said at one point that we're one of the haves now. And so that was interesting, like sort of how bold he was about it.
He also had a line in there that he felt like last year they won in the portal, and I think that's kind of what we're going to spend the bulk of the time on today. It's hard to argue that, I think, when you look at the work that they've done and the guys that are contributing in various places on this roster this year. I think they definitely hit a higher batting average with guys that have been contributors that they got out of the portal this year, and even some guys who I think we're maybe seen as not lottery tickets, but kind of like, we'll take this guy and see how he pans out. A few of those guys have hit as well. But what do you kind of make of that, last year's portal class and kind of how that's affected things on the field so far this season?
Yeah, I think he's probably right that they won. There's still some grades out on a few people. Like, you can look at the defensive line and there's like your Jalen Georges and your Gabe Moores, and we're going to see like where they come along. But Williams-Nwaneri, start with him. Like back in the spring, I would have wondered, and probably did on a podcast like this, if he was just like sort of a fringe guy, this season, not for the course of his career, but this year, if he was going to have a slow build up to what you hope he can be. And he's still building, don't get me wrong, but he's playing like 45, 50 snaps a game. Like he's out there all the time and making plays. And I think anybody whose objective would say there's been really good growth there for a guy who played hardly any college football. And that's a former number 6 overall ranked guy in the 24/7 class, even one spot ahead of Dylan Raiola. So that's a big deal. There's been a couple where maybe you thought there was going to be a little more. You maybe thought you're going to hear more from Watson Trent this season than you have. But Dasan McCullough, prior to the injury, I think has been a very useful tool, and just like how they can use him. And then on the offensive side, the receivers, though their numbers may not knock you over, Isaiah Hunter and Dane Key, I think, have been good for this program, and they're blocking at a high level. And Isaiah Hunter is a guy you'd love to keep around as long as he plays college football.
Yeah, I mean, just on on the defensive side of the ball, you ended up with the starting cornerback and Andrew Marshall. You got a couple nice depth pieces, special teams guys, and Justin Rhett and Jameer Khan. You mentioned Waneri. Gabe Moore, I think, was a guy that was just completely an unknown. And you did the defensive snaps after the UCLA game. He played, like 15 snaps in that game?
Yeah, he played more.
So, I mean, that's at least trending in a positive direction there. Trying to think who else I'm missing on defense. You basically completely reshaped your special teams units because you hit on a long snapper, Kevin Gallick, who you haven't had to think about at all this year. You got Kyle Kananen, who's your starting place kicker. And then you go on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you got your starting left tackle, an important starting right guard. And I think the biggest win compared to maybe what, you saw last year was just, I really think they hit on the right guys with Key and Hunter. I mean, like you said, I mean, these are not, the numbers are not, astronomical right now. But if you go back and watch that UCLA game, like Isaiah Hunter was just wearing guys out in that game. In the first Emmett Johnson, the first Emmett Johnson touchdown, the long screen pass, you look early on in that play, and he really cleared some space out. There was another play late in the game when they're running the 4-minute offense where he comes in and just moved a cornerback out of the way so Emmett could bounce and play to the outside, and that was basically the ball game right there. And I think both of those guys have really kind of set the right tone in that offense. And like you said, Hunter's got a couple of years left, so hopefully you're able to hang on to him. But I think that's where you kind of really leveled up a little bit, is just kind of finding the right guys at that wide receiver spot. And I think Nebraska's going to probably have to dip in there again and find a wide receiver or two. I just think that's a spot where you do that. But I think those guys have really kind of stood out compared to everybody else in that transfer class.
You know what else helps Nebraska and you makes the case that they won the portal last year is Emmett Johnson, because how good he's been. Think about all the words and thoughts that have been spent on like who they didn't get. And obviously Marty Brown is a really interesting player, and there could have been a possibility there. But the way the season has played out and the fact that Emmett has stayed durable and is like now a national award type candidate back, in a way, Bruntz, it doesn't matter that they didn't have the second guy that much. Like, I mean, maybe they do. Like when in the program, that's what Rhule and those guys would argue. We've got them. They just haven't had their reps, whatever. The point is, like, you've got somebody who's can log 55 to 60 snaps a game at running back and do it at a very high level. And so that works for this year. Now, that's another spot where if Emmett is not here, you're going to have to nail it. And maybe that the conversation we had all of this offseason and up through October, you can table that until next year, and it's going to matter again. But Emmett sort of washes over the one complaint that I think a lot of people had. And at this point, you'd have to say, well, it's not that big a deal because you've got a back that's producing at a high level.
Yeah, at the start of the year, I mean, it was running back was one topic of conversation. Certainly defensive line, I think, was one that you would probably have pointed to that maybe you needed a little bit more of a difference maker, especially early on.
Yeah.
Because you didn't know what you had yet in Petchak. Waneri was still a little bit of an unknown. You had to kind of get bring those guys along. And it looks a little bit better now, I think, with the trajectory of that group. But that would have been one area where you kind of could have used another guy. Probably will have to next year as well, just with the guys they're losing. But yeah, I mean, the transfer portal conversation around the running backs is kind of a fascinating one. And Emmett, like you said, has kind of wallpapered over a lot of that because he kind of has that Amir Abdullah-like quality to not take big hits. He's extremely durable, and he's, I think probably better than even the biggest Emmett Johnson supporters probably could have hoped for this season.
Mm-hmm. Now, big ones going forward, like Pritchett. Like maybe in the offseason, people thought either he's a hit or not, and it's a 1-year deal. There's some people who might have wondered that. He's got another year left to play, and maybe that's a situation where you can kind of build off his progress if that all works together, and you can keep him in the fold. And you've got a left tackle then, because he's been playing better. Obviously, when Aries a guy, you got to lock up. I mean, the potential there is just great, and we're already seeing some of it. And then there's others I'm not really worried about, but just like Andrew Marshall, you've got for another year as a corner, as you said, has played at a really good level, and I think just fit in, sort of like Sierra Wright fit in last year. It just feels like he just kind of was seamless, and like he belongs in this program and has the kind of mindset they like. So those are guys who you think about as like next year, like it'd be awesome to just keep this rolling. And it goes back to the first question you asked or comment we were making about Rhule's comments the other day. Ideally, you can keep those guys because he sounded like a coach who is hopeful they can do that kind of stuff.
Kind of a bye-week conversation there. But yeah, I mean, a lot of those questions are going to be fascinating over the next couple months here. The portal opens in January this year with the change in schedule. So we'll see what Nebraska can do. But Matt Rhule yesterday definitely confident that they can keep things rolling, keep the guys that they want to keep, while also continuing to add to the roster. So we'll be discussing that much more at Husker 24/7 throughout the week. Make sure you get there.